Yeah, here we are again. Professor Anton has gotten back on the subject again. I keep saying I'm not interested, and it comes back. But yeah, it is the subject. You really can't avoid these big question. What's it all about? Alfie kind of thing. Sort of looks like an Alfie actually. Anyway, so he starts off again with these religious stuff. Like, well, Adam ate the apple, and was it Eve's fault, or was it this? Well, what is that all? Kind of like implying somehow that any kind of philosophy that might scrutinize existence is always going to be dragged into dogmatic religious mush, even if it's just based on a simple observation that we evolved and that it's a DNA molecule, and that isn't a very good reason, and we maybe ought to take a look at this and see what's happening. Anyway, so we'll play a little bit of that.
And she, for realizing that it was all, very difficult. An imposition, I'll use that word. And I don't know, I thought that would be
cool. So he kind of thinks Jesus was like some sort of apology for the imposition. Yeah, really, it was just a promise of some sort of dopey hope, right? That's all Jesus was like oh, we're gonna do it over again, and we're not gonna do that whole king and Rome, all this stuff where we get all killed all the time. We're gonna do it right for a change, and people won't have leprosy and all that kind of stuff, and people will care for each other, and they won't do all that money thingy. But of course, none of that happened. So yeah, it was a big, it was a big giant fail. But anyway, continuing.
Give me something I had to get a response from. Someone sent me a video from this guy named
Liam, I think it is. Yeah. I'm not great at that foreign crap either, but Liam, which is it's a good name. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of funny. It's a video he posted a while back when you were on the subject, and he's just moving stuff to another channel, copying it over. And so I saw the video again, and somebody maybe saw that I saw it again, and then they pointed, rubbed your nose in it again. But whatever, it's a good video, and I'm glad you responded to it.
I am vlog, and I'm done with this argument. I don't want to have the argument
except for this video.
Trying to drag me in it. I think you're trying to drag me in it because I'm done with the argument. But I think
yeah, obviously you're not done. Oh, that's pretty funny.
Is he sends this video, and he gives these lists of these premises, and he says that he doesn't really want this to be true, but I mean it's so much it's kind of condescending and patronizing. He's saying, oh, I don't want it to be true, but it
oh, like you don't play those kind of word games. Like in every single one of your videos, oh, well, I really feel what you're saying, and it's just so, and then you do the butt thing and just kind of blah 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 blah. So whatever, come on, play the game.
Is so true, and yet no, it's really not true. And in fact, it was contradictory, and a lot of the things you said, I was just...
Yeah, well, you should just get to it, because actually, yeah, your explanations of the contradiction are vacant, and yeah, you really got to do a little more work here. I mean, you're way short of a good enough annihilation of those premises. You don't really come even close to denting them.
I guess in some way, I'm sick of the argument, and then a little bit irritated at that toward the end, you're going to suggest that I'm engaged in ad hominems against Gary? That I'm...
Oh, yeah, what a suggestion. My. Yes, you have been engaged in such things. But whatever. Again, just keep playing the game. Keep overemphasizing the villains and the heroes.
I'm not talking about the argument. I'm talking about other stuff. No.
Yes,
you can't have it both ways. You keep talking about psychology. You're giving examples. You use the example of Gary as the example in this very video.
Yes, that's right. That's perfectly legitimate, and I don't know. He wasn't making there's no hypocrisy in using something as an example. So the difference between using something as an example for the purpose of real evidentiary value and being personal, attacking somebody personally, those are two different uses of a personal experience. One is evidentiary, one is for the purpose of, cheating in an argument.
You said Gary is an example of someone who would be the illustration of would have been better not to have been. And then you said, well, it's not about any individual being happy or unhappy, but just the logic of the argument. Well, make up your mind.
Well, like I said, there's no contradiction there. You're just pretending. I mean, you're just avoiding the truth of the matter, that they are evidentiary. All right? The point is that your opinion of the evidence can't be just ambiguous. It's got to be based on some sort of evidence and statistics and all of that kind of crap. So again, you're just playing with words here to avoid the fact that there are existing witnesses, that you have testimony, you have evidence of life's failure.
Now let's go to your actual argument. You say a child is a separate entity to you with its own rights. That's right. A child is, but that's one who already has sentience, someone who's already born.
Well, whatever. Regardless of where you define, the point is that the strict point is that it's a new consciousness. It's not your consciousness. It's not you who projects yourself into the future. You create a new independent sentient entity.
Then you say you have a choice whether or not to have children. No, you don't.
Well, that's just, I mean, really, this is just silly. Yes, you do. You have complete control over what you will allow to happen to your fertility.
This is something that you'll have to negotiate with a woman. You're going to have a discussion with another person, and you don't get to make that choice.
Yes, you do. Okay, in the negotiation, you just say, well, look, it's a non-starter. I mean, if you're out to have kids, I certainly don't think that's ethical. I mean, I'm not going to marry a woman who's going to do, I like to, eat squirrels alive. Well, then I guess we're just not going to be able to work it out, because that's not right, babe. So, I mean, really, it isn't about negotiating. It's about your principles and whether you'll sell out for some treats. But the point is you certainly have the power not to procreate.
In some way, it's more than up to you. It may be up to her, it may be up to both of you. You say before you have a child, there's no way to ask it if it wants to live.
Well, the point would be whether you want to call the entity the individual male or the individual female or the couple. It doesn't matter. The entity has the choice. The entity decides to conduct and to perpetrate this behavior. It is not forced on them. They choose to initiate the process. They press the button, Professor. They press it with a penis hits a button in the vagina, and the game is on.
Well, right, and that means there's no way for it to tell you that it's willing to take the risk. You make it seem like...
Yeah, well, the point is there is no contract here, okay? This isn't, you're playing with somebody else's welfare for good or bad, and there is no consent, all right? So that's important. It's not a minor thing, it's a major thing. And so you have to be really sure about results when you're going to do something that's going to possibly implicate somebody in a potentially very bad way. Whether it's very good also is irrelevant, to the point that you can't impose the negative. You have to eliminate the possibility of the negative or drastically reduce the negative to have any hope to justify the imposition.
The child would hear the risk and then say, well, geez, I don't want the risk at all. But maybe it would say, I'll risk it. I know lots of people who are risky. I know lots of people who are very happy with life. Now you're going
no, you're going to say I'm going to say this. No, I'm going to say what metaphors have already been used before. And the point isn't, you don't get to say, well, one guy really liked it. That's not a good enough argument. Okay, you have to understand the context of the argument. The argument, there's four of you, your friends. You decide, you're talking among yourselves and making a decision about what you're going to do. And you say, okay, well, we're going to go do this certain thing, okay, and it involves peanuts somehow. You're going to go to the circus, and it's all or nothing. All four of you go, or all four of you don't go. That's the choice. There is no other way to do it. It's all or nothing. And the point is one of you is deadly allergic to peanuts. So as soon as you go into that circus, he's going to die. Alright? And he's going to die hard. You know, convulsions, the whole smear, suffocate to death right in front of your eyes. That's what's going to happen to him. And that's a fact. Okay, now there's no need for you to go to the circus. It's just kind of a joyride, kind of just for fun. He's going to die. And so now you're making this decision. And what we're arguing to you is no rational person would say, I'm going to impose it on him. I'm going to force him to come along and die to satisfy my silly need to go, say something funny to the elephant. That's the scenario. That's the thought experiment that defines this dilemma the birther is in, but denies being in. But that's the reality of their circumstance. And, yeah, there's just nothing else here. Now, if we could make the argument that the dead, the zombies, which are the four people, ultimately, needed to be risen, needed to be here, needed desperately, they had to go to the circus or they would suffer, or they would die some substantial harm. They would incur some substantial harm if they don't exist. Then you could make the argument that you could justify the harm imposed. But you can't, because there is no rescue mission here. The non-existent aren't writhing somewhere, screaming to be saved by being ejected out of a vagina. They're just not doing it. There's no reason to believe they are. No rational, logical reason. And so therefore we just can't you just can't justify the negative risk. It's like a nuclear power plant. If it'll run for 4 decades, but there's a 1 in 4 chance in those decades that it will melt down. You just can't run the risk. You can get away with it for 30 years, you can get away with it for 39 years, but then you're fucked.
To say, well, that doesn't really matter. But the number of people who want to live forever, the number of people who want to live longer, really shows you that there's a number of people out there who don't think it would have been better not to have been.
And again, it's not the point. The million people who commit suicide is the ones screaming the fact. The ones in all the debilitated circumstances. I mean, 1/3 of the population is disabled. And some of them harshly, brutally. Especially the mentally disabled, a life I certainly wouldn't want to live. Again, over and over and over and over. So you can't separate these two things. To have one, you have to accept the other. And you have to accept it in the context of imposition.
You say, number 4, having a child means you have voluntarily forced life onto a new separate entity without its consent. Okay, correct. But you also didn't get an opportunity to ask it, so it seemed like a force, but if the...
It seemed like a force? No, I'm sorry. We know statistically, like I said, 1 million people are going to commit suicide this year. It's not going to change. Next year it'll be 1 million, it's just going to keep happening. Alright, we know it's a known quantity. What percentage of the human race won't find any comfort here? And we haven't even gotten into the demographics of the animals, who some of them have a average lifespan of where they had a potential lifespan of 15 years, but their average lifespan is 3 because of the harshness and the brutality of the environment they're trying to live in. So yeah, again, all this is taking place for a joyride, for some sort of notion of accomplishment, not a proven accomplishment. No rescue mission, no saved babies, no heroic anything here. And you've imposed this collateral damage. So it's essentially bombing a country for no good reason, to accomplish nothing but to make some pretty little explosions. And you have all this collateral damage.
child would have been consulted, you don't know that it wouldn't have said, please speak on my behalf.
Right, we do know. That's the whole point. We know the statistics. We know how it's going to turn out. And you're going to keep talking about speaking on the behalf of the people who want to live, but you won't listen to the people who don't want to live. And who should have the veto? I'm arguing that the person with the peanut allergy has a veto. If you were doing something important, well, he wouldn't have a veto. But you're not doing something important, so he has a veto. He has the right to say, what the fuck? I don't want to go to the goddamn circus and be tortured, you fucking idiot.
It has no one else to speak on its behalf, and so because of that, you could call it an imposition, but in some way it was a delegated duty from someone who can't speak on their own behalf.
Well, right, so you're going to say it's a delegated duty. Again, what rational person is going to permit the circumstance? So if you're in charge of these 4 children, right, and they decide to play Russian roulette, are you going to let them? And let's say they're playing with, like a rubber bullet, so they won't even kill. One of them won't be killed. They'll just be brutally harmed. So you're just going to let them pass the gun around, and one of them's going to be brutally harmed, and the 3 others are going to laugh gleefully, ha ha ha, sucker, and then you'll all go to the circus. I mean, that's the scenario here. So what responsible parent would allow that to happen? Oh, that's right, no responsible parent. So that's the decision to be made here. And there's just no way of avoiding the fact that there's no way to be a responsible producer of children, because you are going to impose that fucking rubber bullet in that fucking head.
And you had the responsibility and the risk to try to decide whether or not that was a risk worth taking. Now, you say there is a small but statistically significant risk that the child's life will not be worth living.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a small statistical risk. I think that's just part of the propaganda of the birthers, because they get to control the system in so many ways, because they're placated by both the political parties. Because they're the biggest minority, so they have the loudest voice. And the objectionists tend to not give a damn anyway. They're on the outskirts of society. The better never to have beens, are, whatever, collecting cans on the streets of New York or something. So you're not listening to them. But yeah, I would argue that it's not a tiny percentage. I think you could even go for some numbers like, if you ask the question directly, you might get a 20% response if you got honest responses from people. And I think the older the people are, you go to a nursing home or something, that number's going to go a little bit higher.
Will wish it had never been born. Okay, a small but statistically significant. What's your data there? I want to see some hard data on the actual percentage of number of people, compared to the number of people who've been, give me the number of people who say that, and then we'll try to get to some argument about whether or not people really would, if you could ask them.
Well, I mean, realistically, you can't think we can just speculate on that number. We can't, you don't know anybody in your life who probably is going to say that. If they're honest, and if they aren't playing word games, if they aren't singing like Frank Sinatra songs or something, I did my way, even though it was really stupid and fucked up. Anyway, I think I hate to cut a video, but yeah, I'll cut it. Be back soon. Alright, back. Yeah, I mean, this is really irritating that this argument always comes up, but I mean, it is the subjective element of this whole thing, is that you could almost argue that, okay, let's say we can't intelligently even come up with some sort of answer to the real value of the game, whether the game is a stupid game or a really, really fun game. Okay, but some people think it's a really, really fun game. Some people think it's preposterously stupid, makes them throw up. It's just disgusting to be here. And now we're trying to decide whose perspective is the correct perspective. And we're saying, okay, we're tripping over it philosophically because we don't have any empirical knowledge, anything, godly to tell us what the truth is regarding how silly it is. I would argue that there's more credible argument and less credible argument, but whatever. The bottom line point is that you can't use popularity. Like, most of us don't think you people are sane or some kind of bullshit like that. to justify this notion where you're just saying the game is good. You're not proving it. You're not demonstrating it. You're just saying it. So it's just some sort of, oh, everybody likes Ronald Reagan. Doesn't matter if his policies are complete shit. So that doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, majority opinion can't be used. You just can't use that as an authority. And that's all you're kind of doing here.
And say, are you glad that your parents spoke on your behalf? Because you couldn't speak, aren't you glad that they gave voice to an option?
It's just so stupid, again, and that as opposed to my commentary, which is I resent them thinking they had the competence to know what the fuck was going to happen, or they had any control over the circumstance whatsoever, and put me at risk of even a worse circumstance than the one I'm existing. It's bad enough they would have me in a jackass world full of fucking smelly pigs, where they hadn't fixed any problems at all. It's a shabby, shitty nest that they laid the egg in. So, yeah, I mean, what is there? I'm supposed to give them an award? I'm supposed to say thank you? Of course not.
For you, that you would have been denied had they not given birth to you. Okay, and then you say there is no way in this instant for the child to, quote, get a refund or reverse the suffering it has been through. Okay, well, there is no refund because there was no child before it was born.
Oh, so again, this is the catch. The point is how do you compensate for the loss? The failure is catastrophic, is my argument and his argument. It's a catastrophic failure. All right, you can't buy insurance against it. You can't undo somebody's suffering. So that's the dilemma. It's a real dilemma. It's not a fake dilemma. It's as real as Fukushima or any other thing that goes wrong, and then you're stuck with a huge mess, and there's just no way to even calculate how you're going to distribute the harm that's going to be imposed. And it's likely going to be imposed on a certain group, and they're going to be thrown into that harm group, and everybody else is just going to kind of pretend it didn't happen. And that's the game being played with life, is the people living outside, the realm of the harm, just discount the real price being paid for the catastrophic failure. Shit.
See, you're making it seem like the child had something and then lost it.
There is a state change, okay? Whether you consider the entity a thing before it became a thing is irrelevant. The point is the matter even itself went from the state of not being connected to a living thing to now being animated, alive, conscious matter. So my matter in itself we could call the thing beforehand, the dead, and it was injected with the life, and the life automatically, without any serious real doubt, is going to have the consciousness arise in it, if it has the human genome.
By suffering, but there was nothing there at all. So yeah, of course there's no refund. Can it be redone?
Again, the refund needs to be given to the entity that got the harm, okay? You don't give the refund to the person a month ago or 3 years ago. If I get a refund from the bank or from the store or from some other thing on my credit card, they don't put the refund back before I was born. They give the refund to the person today. All right? The point is you can't refund the entity, okay, that has been damaged.
Or undone? No, I mean, I guess some of this is okay, but I would say also death cures all wounds.
Death cures all wounds. Again, so it's just more of this thing like it just didn't matter. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what crime you commit or what atrocity happens. You're just going to pretend that as long as you kill the bitch, it's all okay. So go, rape is okay. Just don't leave her behind to suffer. Kill her. And then it's all cured. You cured the problem. You don't like the war? Well, just kill all the relatives of the victims. And then it's even cleaner, right? Because then there's no one to mourn the dead on the battlefield, right? Just kill all the parents of all the dead soldiers. They can't cry. Kill all the brothers and sisters of the dead soldiers. They can't cry. Yeah, that just cleans up the whole fucking mess then. You cured the problem. Shit.
Death cures it all. Okay, last one. Therefore, it is irresponsible to have a child because it is an unnecessary gamble with another person's welfare.
Oh, now, I just don't know how you can How can you get away from that fundamental truth? There's just no doubt about it. It's a risk equation, and it has, even if we concede your joyful, happy extreme, it has the other extreme risk. And a rational person does not choose something that contains a catastrophic poison pill risk.
No, it was a necessary gamble for those who want to live, and I'm very glad that I am. I wasn't able to speak without my mother, and I am adopted. My biological mother gave me up, and I'm glad that she, not a boy, not a man.
Oh, brother. Again, so your testimony is somehow more valid than anybody who says exactly the opposite. I'm not glad. I'm not grateful. I'm not appreciative of the recklessness and the sloppy philosophical thinking that led to my existence. I resent the ignorance of it, the stupidity of it, the selfishness of it, the nonsense of it. It's disgusting to me. It's revolting to me. So why is your testimony valid, my testimony somehow is not? That's the question here. You're claiming that your claim of it's all okay is somehow good enough to overwhelm completely, to destroy and annihilate my claim that it's not even close to good enough.
She made the decision to have me and to give me up, and I'm very thankful for her speaking on my behalf, because no one else could have. No one else.
Well, again, that's right, and it's her responsibility, and it's every her. So for every one of her, 1 in 4 of those hers makes the same exact decision, and it leads to a catastrophe. So when we have a circumstance like that with drinking and driving, what's the rational thing to do? The rational thing to do is to say, no, you don't impose this risk. There's no justification for it. I mean, sorry, but we can't justify creating victims for what is, you didn't need to be here. You're just happy once you got here. That's just not good enough. I mean, you have to need it beforehand. You have to be in some sort of horrific hell and be screaming to be rescued for you to justify throwing me in this real hell where I have to argue with you assholes to be liberated from the future jeopardy you're going to keep putting me in.
Could have. And I want to say one last thing, which is, to me, and this is the argument. Why don't you come at this argument?
Well, what? You didn't deal with these arguments, okay? You've just ignored the imposition by saying the kid doesn't exist beforehand. So how can you possibly impose on something that doesn't exist? I mean, with nonsense like that. Deal with the metaphor I put before you. There is a risk, okay? Either deal with the, would you allow your children to play Russian roulette, or deal with the scenario where it's an all or nothing thing. You either drag the one guy to the stupid circus and force him to endure the suffering and the harm, or you'd say, yeah, I don't need it that much. I can get enough out of my life. I don't need to procreate. And that's all this is about. It's about giving up the right to impose life on the next generation. Why should you have a right to impose life on another generation? It's not a right. At best, it's a huge responsibility, and if you're going to do it, you ought to have some sort of authority, some sort of license, some sort of explanation for what's going to be accomplished. How do you pay? What is the insurance against the liability? Again, we don't allow anybody to do anything in the real world out there without having proper insurance.
Okay? The argument is that you're not going to be able to boil down the conditions of sentience and the meanings of life to the fact of biological procreation. You're not just going to be able to...
Well, I don't see how anybody's boiling it down to that, but it's a fundamental fact that it doesn't exist unless you do it. Unless you reproduce it, it's not going to exist. It's a fundamental... It is the start button, Professor. You can't figure that out. You start the life when you make the decision in your gear work to say, I'm going to take on this responsibility. You press the start button. You start a new life. You continue the machine to run another generation, another generation, another generation. You maintain the game. Then you have to take responsibility for the game if you're going to maintain the game.
Do sit down to that act as if that was the determining factor on this thing called sentience and quality of life. Not only is there an ontogenesis of the development of sentience that has something to do with the way the person is, they're acculturated, they come to self-awareness.
Oh, well, whatever. I mean, I think there's just no point in even talking on the internet if you're going to make some dopey claim that we're all captives of a culture or something else when it comes to these philosophical conversations. I'm not anti-natalist through cultural indoctrination into that philosophy. I don't understand evolution because a culture forced me to believe it. It did provide me the freedom to believe it, which is important. So let's just argue that there's a value to this intellectual freedom, and once you have intellectual freedom, though, there's no point in talking about what culture you're from. The point is to make the arguments about what is the context of our reality, and to ignore the fact that the origins of our biology are a critical fact to the functionality of us as a being on this planet, and whether we are a parasitic infestation doing absolutely nothing but, as I've metaphored, climbing a mountain of bullshit at a huge catastrophic cost. I mean, it's fundamentally important. You want to run away from that truth and say life is untouchable, it's the God, it's the DNA God, and we will not examine it, we will not judge it, we will not contextualize what we're functioning as part of. I mean, you really won't look at your Tyrannosaurus soul?
It's not like you're sentient right out the womb. It has to do with an emergence. It has to do with various coming to self-consciousness in time. And even there's great cultural variety on the experience of sentience. There's of how much self-awareness there is, how much...
Oh, come on. I mean, like I said, the internet has demonstrated that it's a very small world, not all nuanced, okay? We can find people from all kinds of cultures that can share exactly the same kind of metaphor or understanding of the context of their existence, and they can converse about it in perfectly lucid manner. So this is all a pile of shit. We transcend our biology when we have a full intellectual model, a fully informed intellectual model of reality. Then we transcend this individuality, this physicalness that you're saying, well, you have blue eyes, therefore you must believe, ...
Anxiety is encumbered by that culture's traditions, practices, orientations. I think these larger questions of what are the social political conditions, what are the environmental conditions that bring about a better quality of life that...
Yeah, so, I mean, he's almost going to imply the Buddhist thing here again, like somehow the Buddhists are living better, and we know they're not living better, okay? I don't know what the suicide numbers are in Tibet and all these other places, but they probably can't even keep the numbers because their cultures are so dysfunctional. And you're going to put them on a pedestal somehow, like that's the model we should be striving for. People who will sell the skin of a Bengal tiger, for $25.
Lessen that statistically significant risk of people not wanting to have been born. I think there are things that we can do to try to help. I mean, there are ways that people...
Yeah, well, I think there are things we can do to try to help you over your obsession with this idea that the game has to keep being played. Like, we just can't tear down Yankee Stadium. We just can't end we gotta, it's like you're romanticizing. You're like some guy... let's say we allowed bullfighting, and we finally figured out no, in the modern era now. And there were these old bullfighting stadiums, and everybody was so romantic about them. It's like Wrigley Field or something. Oh, we've got to maintain the tradition. So maybe we can do something to get you over your little silly addiction to this notion that the game has to keep being played, even though you have absolutely no reason to utter those words. Absolutely no harm would be incurred by anything if the game does not continue. The only harm is in your psychology and your dopey notion that there needs to be a bullfight arena. And it's completely made out of shit. So maybe we can help you get over your silly notion that this dumb tradition of a DNA molecule eating its own ass for billions of years is just stupid.
Can do amnio testing to make sure that severe disabilities, I mean, a person may...
Wow, you really stepped into some mud there, right? So 1 minute you're saying your mother, you're so grateful that your mother didn't just say, fuck, I mean, I just had sex with a complete asshole, and I'm pregnant, and she decided to have you. And now you're saying you're so grateful to be alive. And now you're basically denying the testimony of a bunch of autistics and otherwise broken people who amniocentesis would discover. And you're saying, well, they, even though you'll have just the opposite probably in percentages, testimony from them saying, I want to live. I'm so glad my mother saved me. I'm so glad. You could even have somebody theoretically with elephant man disease who would say, I'm just so glad, you know, even if we get detected in utero. And there might be somebody who would come out and he would be so delusional, so fucked up, he'd be saying, I'm so glad to be here. I don't even care if I'm going to blah, blah, blah. You won't even understand what he's saying. But you get my drift here, right? So your testimony that you're so grateful that your mother understood that you needed to exist, and now you're saying, well, no, we can cut off all those people. No, you can't have that both ways, Professor. So you're going to have to modify that rhetoric a little bit and say, oh, no, you know what? There's going to be people completely broken, completely horrifically deformed, and they're going to be able to raise their hand and say, I'm so glad I'm alive. It's going to happen, Professor. So are you going to speak for them? Come on. So now you're in a dilemma, aren't you? Because now you're basically going to have to advocate to be consistent with your standards, that you respect the will of the deformed, and a percentage of the deformed, and impose life on all the ones that are going to hate their existence, or who are going to be just horrifically tortured and never even be able to understand their existence. And you'll just wipe those, for fuck them, and let's just listen to the guy that's happy about it. And so, yeah, no, you cannot abort babies because of a catastrophic deformality, because there could be one of them that wants to live. That's exactly what you're saying here. And that's logically inconsistent and nutty.
Want to do some of that in advance. Maybe someone doesn't want to, but I think that would be, I think, one thing that one person could do that's very realistic. But to me, I would want you to answer this question. If a person wants to be born and they really want to live, for you that question can't make sense because there really is no person there, but that person doesn't have anyone to speak on.
Well, you really have to understand that your desires and your needs and your capacities don't exist till you're born. That's right. And they only exist once you are here. But once you're here, they're real. The harm is real. All of this stuff is real. So it's just bullshit. And what's being measured here is the want. Oh, I want versus harm. All right, my argument is want is kind of trivial, harm is not, and so you just can't play it this way.
Their behalf, except the already living. How does someone, this baby, whose use you claim that a child is a separate entity to you with its own rights, how does that child get the right to claim, I want to be born, except by someone who is living and is going to speak on their behalf? Okay, please.
Yeah, again, well, that's the dilemma, right? So it's a dilemma, but you can't have it. That's the problem. It's the same scenario as the peanut thing. That's right. You just can't have joy rides at catastrophic harm as the expense. You can't impose the price for something on one individual and let the other three enjoy the fruit. So one guy can't be the fertilizer and the other three get to be the fruit, okay, by arbitrary, unjust method. So until you engineer all people to be as dumb as you, exactly as stupid as you are, and silly and fucktarded, then that's right, you don't have a right to impose. You have to impose on a psychology that's the same as yours, that wants to eat your food and wants to live in your cesspool and wants to idolize your authors and wants to think he's accomplishing something and wants to play his little pretentious games. And so if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to engineer your future victim, then you don't have a right to make the victim. And that's just a fact. Unless you make it fail safe, or fail safer, or safe enough, you don't have a right to play the game. Because the collateral damage has rights that you don't have a right to violate. Jeez. Thank you very much.